Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final podcast of 2024 for the Michigan Association of Counties, podcast 83. We are joined by the normal group of government affairs folks from MAC, Deena, Bosworth, Madeline, Fata, Samantha, Gibson. And we are going to recap the last week of lame duck, or blame duck, as some people are calling it, and still blame being cast across many different people, even this week. So let's talk about it. What happened the last week of lame duck? Fill us in.
Wow, where do we even start? So much happened. I've
Start,
never,
finish. There may not even be an end, right? As we were talking,
there
there may not be an end of it.
may not be an end. I think where do we start? I think we start with the House being unable to have a quorum in their chamber to finish working on bills this year. We saw the Republicans on Friday the 13th walk out of the chamber. They were absolutely done. They drew a line in the sand and said, if you're not going to pass, tip credit, you're not going to fix earned sick leave, then we're not going to sit around here and vote on all of these bills that you want to get through. They were really trying to force their hand to make that happen. Unfortunately, Speaker Joe Tate decided he was not going to deal with that. He was not going to take up the tip credit or the earned sick leave. And so the Democrats then decided that they were going to have session by themselves. And they were pretty successful on Friday for a while until about 10 o'clock at night when everything fell apart when Karen Whitsett, Democrat from Detroit, decided that she was leaving the chamber and she left. They no longer had a quorum and couldn't pass any more bills. Wow. Then what happened? The following week, we saw the same thing. They were not scheduled to be in session on Monday or Tuesday, but they were on Wednesday. On Wednesday, they could not get a quorum again. The Republicans said, no way, we're not coming in if you're not going to fix this tip credit and earn sick leave. And then you saw again Karen Whitsett say, I'm not coming in either. I've got all kinds of priorities that I want to pass too, and some of those being what the Republicans wanted. So she didn't come. So that again, they didn't have a quorum on Wednesday or on Thursday. They
Well,
tried to call the House.
Thursday she came in, correct? Or Friday?
They did not have a quorum, but no, it was Thursday.
Okay.
And she finally did drive to Lansing, but she never entered the chamber. And so they could not get enough people to have a quorum. Speaker Joe Tate did a call to the House trying to get Representative Whitsett and incoming Speaker Matt Hall, who are both in Matt Hall's office, into the chamber so that he could have a quorum and get some work done. That didn't happen. And after about an hour of waiting for them to come to the chamber, he adjourned. And he adjourned until the end of the year.
Yeah, so
Um,
it's essentially December 31st at I think noon or something like that.
yep, they're done. They're
All
done
right.
voting.
So then in the meantime, what was the Senate doing?
The Senate was doing what the Senate is supposed to do, vote on bills. And they did. Um, Once they heard, though, that the House was just adjourned for the rest of the year and they were not going to have enough votes to get anything done, the Senate did a marathon session, longest ever, 29 hours of straight Senate session. And they went through every single House bill that came over to their chamber to determine what they were going to vote on and what they weren't. So they voted on over 90 bills. They were in session from 10 a.m. on Thursday morning until 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon. It was a long night.
Yeah, because at that point, then not only did they have a lot of bills that they wanted to vote on, and we'll talk about what happens with those bills in a second, the process there, but Republicans were requesting every bill be read in its entirety, correct?
There were so many games that were played. Yes, Steve, you were correct. You were correct. They stood up and gave no vote explanations on just about everything. It got to the point, I don't even know what time in the morning it was, Steve, when they started to request that every single bill be read in its entirety. It was a very, very lengthy session. So the Republicans were really trying to slow down the Democrats on the bills that they were passing and just ate up all the time. I frankly felt very sorry for the clerks who had to stand up there and read all of those. But it was definitely a tactic they used to slow them down.
Yeah, so they extended session as long as possible. So let's talk a little bit about that. So any bill that was passed out of the Senate, obviously that was a House bill. Senate bill had no option to get done because of the 5-day rule and essentially no action taken. But if you had a House bill in the Senate that was voted on, what happens to those bills that voted on in the Senate? Let's talk two different scenarios there. So let's explain that.
Okay. Okay. So if there were House, when a bill passes the House, it goes to the Senate. If the Senate changes it, the bill has to go back to the House for a concurrence vote before it can be sent to the governor. With the House not able to have a quorum and so unable to have session or vote on anything, any House bill that came out of the Senate had to be unchanged from the way that it came over. So there were just, I don't even know how many House bills that they voted on that they didn't have in committee, they didn't take testimony on, they didn't amend, they didn't really put their finger or their stamp on it, except for a vote. So those bills that were not changed in the Senate, House bills that were not changed in the Senate, will then automatically get enrolled and presented to the governor for her signature.
Basically requires no House action, so they're good to go.
Exactly.
However, any bill that would have had an amendment, any House bill that would have had an amendment in the Senate would have to be concurred on by the House. And we're anticipating them not to concur anything in. So those bills, essentially, if they were amended in the Senate, they're dead bills.
Essentially, yes. And the funny thing is, they took up the Public Safety Violence Prevention Fund bills, um, and they did substitute bills on those right at the end of their session on Friday afternoon. They took those bills up, they substituted them out, substituted one out with a different bill, and then they amended the other one. Those bills will not be concurred on in the House. I don't know why they did that. But this was something that was extremely important to the city of Detroit, and they wanted it done. So they went in ahead and amended it. I can't imagine, though, the House is going to somehow magically be able to get a quorum on December 31st and concur in those changes. So I think those bills essentially die too.
Right. Yeah. It seems like a monumental task when you couldn't do it basically the last month of the year. All right, let's talk about some of the bills that did or didn't get done. Sam, GEMT, something we were tracking. What does GEMT mean and what happened with the bills?
GEMT is Ground Emergency Medical Transport, and the bill would require MDHHS to apply for the state of Michigan to participate in the federal GEMT program, which is for public entities that provide ambulatory or EMS services to Medicaid recipients. So upon this bill being signed by the governor and then the subsequent application process from MDHHS, local units that provide EMS to Medicaid recipients will get the Medicaid reimbursement from the federal government. So we're thrilled with the passage of that bill.
Yeah, so that was a good one that got through. House bill was approved by the Senate and then did not require a concurrence vote. So we are anticipating the governor signing that. Let's move along because we do have a lot, but we're not going to go through everything that got passed, but obviously the ones that we were kind of tracking. Madeline, what happened with there are a whole bunch of different septic bills, House bills, Senate bills, amendments, changes. Kind of fill us in on what happened with all those septic bills.
Yeah, so the Senate version of the septic bills, it became clear toward the end of the legislature that if there were to be a septic bill to make it all the way through, it was going to be the Senate versions. They got out of committee, they got out of the Senate, but ultimately they died on the House floor. They needed that House vote and they didn't get it. The House versions, it became kind of clear that those weren't going to get movement about 2 weeks ago, I'd say. But ultimately, the final version of those Senate bills was something we could have lived with. The bill sponsor made a lot of concessions to local governments and health departments. So they were in an okay place, but I don't know if they'll take another stab at it next year, but they are dead as of now.
Yeah, it seems like, again, something we talked about, that maybe they bit off a little more than they could chew with that whole septic code situation, and maybe should start taking smaller bites and, let's identify where they're at before we're starting to tell people how they have to fix them and where they are. So maybe a little more pragmatic approach would make sense in the future, but like you said, we'll wait to see on that. Deena, something that did get passed that we were working on for a while, the changes to PA 152, the 80/20 hard cap, how counties pay for healthcare for their employees. What happened with those bills?
Yeah, so it's actually a House Bill 6058. There was a Senate set of bills that did not make it all the way through the process because the House adjourned. But the House bill that was in the Senate was passed by the Senate, and it basically makes 80% the floor. So if your county opted to go the 80/20 route to pay for your employee health care, that bill says that the least amount that you can spend is 80%. And the employee, but you can spend more than that on the cost of that health care. It also raised the hard cap. So if your county opted to do the hard cap route, it significantly raised that dollar threshold for single plus one and family rates. It was something that I know our counties wanted to see that hard cap lifted, just because they wanted to be able to negotiate a little bit more with their employees and cover some of it. The 80% floor, though, is not something that MAC supported at all, and we were opposed to the bill as it went through the process. There's also a fundamental flaw in it. Again, this is the problem without being able to amend bills. The inflationary mechanism that's tied to that hard cap doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's still something confusing that I don't think the department is really going to be able to administer. So I'm not sure the governor is actually going to sign the bill because it's fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, as you mentioned, when you start rushing things through, there's things that fall through the cracks that have to be either fixed or vetoed potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, something we were calling wrongful conviction, it doesn't really explain the true breadth of the bill. Can you talk a little bit about what we mean by the wrongful conviction bills and where those bills ended up?
Yeah, so there was a House bill that was sent over to the Senate, and it was regarding the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act. So a little background, currently, if you file a wrongful imprisonment claim, and you're awarded that claim, you get $50,000 each year that you were wrongfully imprisoned from the state of Michigan. The bills that were introduced in this session would amend that act. So you could get the $50,000 a year from the state for each year you were wrongfully imprisoned, but then you could also sue the political subdivision that prosecuted you. So of course, in our case, that would be the county. Between the 4 county operated conviction integrity units, and then beyond that, the unfunded mandates and the liabilities that counties would be exposed to should someone who was wrongfully incarcerated be able to sue the county. I mean, those are hundreds of millions of dollars statewide in liabilities. So MAC was opposed to that legislation. It's important to note, though, not that we don't want people that are wrongfully imprisoned to be made whole by the state. That's, if not the worst thing your government can do to you. But the county's not the right entity to be held liable for that. So that bill did die in the Senate. The House bill, that is, it didn't receive a vote this last week. So steered clear of that.
Yeah, so we'll see again if that comes up with the new legislative session starting in January. Then a couple more we wanted to talk about minimum staffing. I know we sent out a couple alerts, I believe, over the past 2-3 weeks on this bill. What ended up happening with the minimum staffing bills?
We were able to successfully stall that bill from receiving a vote in the House. So the House bill sat on the House floor for over a year, and the Senate bill that was sent over a few weeks ago at the very start of lame duck also never received a vote in the House. So that bill has died in this session as well.
Yeah, I know we were very active on that, and our members were too, so we appreciate the help on that. And then finally, the last bill on the list we wanted to talk about, unfortunately didn't get movement, Deena, revenue sharing trust funds.
Yeah, I would like to end on a high note. So Steve, I hope you sing a Christmas carol or something after this. But we're very, very, very frustrated with the Senate. They passed over 90 bills. They were in session for 29 hours, and they still refused to take up our revenue sharing trust fund bills. It was something that we've worked extremely hard on. We know that we had more than enough votes in the Senate to actually vote on that and send it to the governor's desk. It should have been changed, but even if it wasn't changed, I think we still would have taken it. But they refused after, county commissioner calls and the 500 letters we did, the, press conference that we did, the multiple phone calls, the just so much effort went into this by us, by our members, by the municipal league, by the townships association, by SEMCOG. I mean, we were all lockstep, arm in arm, ready to go with enough votes in the Senate, and they refused to take it up. Yeah, they passed all kinds of other legislation. So I think pretty frustrated.
Yeah, frustrated. But that being said, Deena, I think we were still trying to get some sort of action on this as late as, lunchtime on Friday. We were still pushing and trying to work with senators. And I think you did get a little bit of an encouraging text from a senator saying, hey, something that still is active in the Senate for next year, right? I mean, it's not a done deal, at least in the Senate.
No, I think, and there were several senators. I mean, Senator Sarah Anthony, Senator Jeremy Moss, Senator John Cherry, especially John Cherry, who worked extremely hard for us on trying to get this done. I talked to all of them, and I actually talked to all of them over the weekend as well, this past weekend, and they assured me that it is a priority and something that they're going to have to figure out how to get done in the budget process next year.
Yeah, that is encouraging to hear the Senate, who has, experience with the bills, willing to look at it again in a new legislative session. Obviously have work to do in the House with a new House and a new majority in the House. But encouraging words nonetheless to work it through the budget process. And as we know, I mean, if you look at 4-year county commissioner terms, I mean, how many years did we work on that one? And we're able to get it done. So this is not something where you take your hat and go home. You come back the next legislative session, get it reintroduced, and work it all over again.
I appreciate the pep talk. You're right. You're absolutely right, Steve. I was just, I have to have a tantrum once in a while when I don't get my way.
Well, yeah, we're all well aware of that. So, looking at, as we close things out here, looking at the legislative session, how it ended. I mean, we talked a little bit about it or mentioned it, Deena, you did on some of these bills that have technical issues, things like that. Do we expect a lot of work in the beginning of the year to get some of these things fixed? Is that what'll happen?
I expect a lot of vetoes.
Interesting.
I do, if they're fundamentally flawed. Now, maybe not a ton, but I do expect some. And those that do make it through the process and are signed by the governor, then yes, we're going to have to go back and do a lot of cleanup. But that happens really with most pieces of legislation that, are put through the process, especially during lame duck. So I won't be surprised if there's a lot to fix it in the beginning of the year.
All right. And as we round things out, is there anything I missed that you guys wanted to talk about at this point? Or are we moving on to the holidays?
Moving on to the holidays, I think.
Well, with this, it is Madeline's last podcast. So Madeline is moving on to greener pastures, I guess, as they say, at least what she thinks is greener pastures. So we wish her the best of luck. Thanks for all her work here at MAC. Everyone, Deena, Madeline, Sam, have a great Christmas and New Year's. Happy holidays to everyone out there. And we will be back again in the new year, starting all over again. So thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.